Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 15, a deeper look into e-collar dog training. Cool, guys. Are we ready to move on to some bad practices?
Let's do it. Let's
Get
do
it.
it.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so bad practice. Shona, start it off. What you got?
Oh, man. Honestly, what you were just saying, but I want to be super clear about this. Bad practices is, asking the dog for a command that you have not appropriately taught. Taught. You've not appropriately taught. They don't know it. And then so you say down, they don't down, and then you correct at a high level. That's really, really bad. You can't do that, right? So yes. There is a stage of training, which is a very final stage, where, yes, I will actually correct at a higher level for a dog that does not comply. Non-compliance, STIM is what I've kind of heard it called. But that's a dog who has done hundreds or thousands of repetitions of sit or down, or let's say we're talking about sit. This dog has done hundreds or thousands of repetitions of sit with tons of food and tons of encouragement and praise and leash guidance. And if I say sit to that dog and that dog does not sit, yes, I may administer a quick correction, right? To make sure that they are listening and they understand they can't ignore.
You're holding the dog accountable at that point because he knows.
You're holding the dog accountable for something that they know, a known command. But a dog that you've kind of worked on sit maybe for a couple of days and they don't really, and you're like, yeah, they know it now. And then you say sit, they don't sit, and you start correcting. That's the worst to me. You can't do that. You can't do that.
Right.
So that would be, I don't know if that would be over correcting, but to me, I'd call that way too early correcting.
Yeah. Over early.
Impatience.
Yep.
I think that's a symptom of impatience on the part of the trainer.
That's a very good perspective. Impatience fucks people up a lot and fucks dogs up a lot, unfortunately.
Oh yeah. Okay. So that would be number one. Don't do it.
One thing that I want to bring up, which is, again, I think in every series that we do of the deeper look, we always talk about bad timing. Right. And so let's talk about some of the problems that can exist in bad timing with e-collars. There's something called superstitious learning or superstitious fears, right? Where a dog, or superstitious associations. I'm so sorry. Superstitious association means if you have bad timing, if you correct the dog at a high level with an e-collar while he was walking by that bush, well, that dog learns to develop a healthy fear of that bush, right? Or if you correct, and in some situations, don't get me wrong, we want to create superstitious association. So rattlesnake training is all about superstitious association. We want the dogs to have a healthy fear of rattlesnakes. So what they do is they put rattlesnakes in a basket. They let the dog go and approach the basket. If the dog reacts towards the basket, they give that dog a freaking crazy correction because they want that dog to associate fear with those rattlesnakes. And that's ultimately what rattlesnake training is, right?
Right. 100%.
So in some ways it's good, right? There's been many times I have many clients that live in the canyons out here in LA, Laurel Canyon, Benedict Canyon, Coldwater Canyon, all the canyons, right? And their fence actually opens up directly to the canyon, right? So if their dog were to get out of those gates, that dog would run out onto the main street, right? And most likely get hit by a car. So in some situations, we do want to use superstitious associations. I do want the dog to know that there's a very clear barrier, but sometimes with really bad timing, we get the dog to be fearful of things that they're not supposed to be fearful of, right? And that's just, that's a bad, we have a bad setup or bad timing in that particular lesson. So that's something I wanted to throw in the basket.
Yeah, definitely. I think that also kind of leaves the door open for learned helplessness. And I was excited to bring this one back up. I know we talked about it last episode, but learned helplessness, for those who don't know, the long description of it is if you put pressure on a dog, which in training isn't necessarily a bad thing to do, but there needs to be clarity of how you turn that pressure off. Like Shona said it perfectly. The dog controls the collar, or the dog controls the leash too, or whatever the pressure is in the moment. But when the dog isn't clear about what the way out of this pressure is, they have a habit of just shutting down altogether. And they're like, if I can't figure out what to do, I'm just going to do nothing. And that, when we talk about overcorrecting or just miscorrecting in general, and we use the example of maybe you correct it too high for like the dog won't sit, so you're turning up pressure, you're impatient, and now the dog really won't sit. But people can perceive it as the dog is being pushy, when in reality the dog is just like, I don't know what to do, I'm just gonna like basically fight for my life right now. And so things can easily spiral out of control if you're not paying close attention to how much pressure is appropriate, but also how clear is your direction. Does your dog completely 100% understand, you turn the collar off by doing this, just do it? And then once you do, then you get your rewards and everything else on top of the now lack of pressure from the collar. You can compound the like reinforcer. So that's definitely something to be weary of. And that kind of plays into, when we talk about the good practice to counteract it, proper foundational work. But I think learned helplessness is something that people get wrong a ton. I see it a lot actually in prong collar training too. And people can be a little heavy-handed with it, or a little early with it, like we were talking about, or correcting the wrong thing. So definitely something to be careful of. Try to make sure that you're clear, your corrections are appropriate, not only in their timing, but their intensity. And that will that in and of itself will go very far into like taking steps in the right direction and avoiding some of these pitfalls.
Right. I do just have to mention bad practices. I love my clients, but there's always a learning curve when learning new tools. Number one, this is funny, charge your collar. That's really important.
Oh yeah. I was considering writing that down, and I was like, nah, people get it, but I do get that quite a bit.
Yeah. Like I had a client, a funny story is, we did an Off Leash program with her, and she's a really high drive pitty. And, and we were working, and she comes for a follow-up, and I'm like, so how's she do? She goes, she's doing a lot better than she was before. And I said, how is she doing comparing to graduation? She's like, well, I mean, I would say she's like 80% for where she was for graduation. I'm like, 80%? That's so strange, because she was so sharp and so motivated, this dog. So we're doing a lesson, and I'm looking and I'm asking her like, okay, go ahead and ask the recall. And I'm purposely, whether, she's roaming out in the field. And I said, okay, ask the recall. And the dog, I'm not really seeing a flinch or a response from the dog. And I'm like, go ahead. Are you pushing the button? She goes, yeah, pushing it. So I go in just to make sure the contacts on the collar are proper, right? That the fit is proper. And it's a short-haired pitty, so it's really hard to mess that up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I put it on, and I said, go ahead and hit the vibrate real quick. And I grabbed the button, and the collar doesn't even turn on. And I said, when was the last time? When was the last time you charged this collar? And she looks at me super perplexed, and she goes, charge the collar?
No.
Oh, sweetie, you have to charge the collar like every other day if you're going to use it this much. And she goes, oh yeah, well that's something. But so the interesting thing is the dog was still 80%, right? And this is a very high drive pitty, right? And so she was still pretty responsive. But as soon as we got her on a charge collar and got her going, she was back at where she was at graduation level. So it was really interesting. So definitely charging your tools, getting to learn the tools, because there is a learning curve for sure.
Right.
Not knowing the tools, not knowing the functionality of the specific device that you have, be it an educator, a Dogtra, Tektronix, like there's so many different models out there. But yeah, and then making sure you have a good fit. I think that's really, really important. Some bad practices that I've had to learn the hard way is what happens when you put on the wrong contact points, and what happens when you leave it on for too long or too tight. So definitely there's something known as necrosis, which is pressure sores. And if you leave contact points on for too long in the same space on e-collars, one of the downsides is they can create pressure sores on the dog. And a lot of people, they sometimes interpret this as they are burns from the electricity that's coming from the collar, which is wrong. We know it's wrong, but however, we can't blame the public for thinking those things. It's our job as educators to really teach people what they need to, what the proper maintenance and protocols are to follow on these tools.
Right. And sometimes that maintenance goes a little deeper than just picking the right contact points. Sometimes it's a matter of trimming down the dog's neck hair a little bit, or going for like a comfort adapter, or, there's it's nice that they have all these different attachments. I think that's another benefit of good quality e-collars is they come with accessories that really help complete the product. But definitely, I've made that mistake too. You and I was talking about that horror story with Pippi. You know, so we've definitely had our fair share of, you know, things going sideways with the wrong contact points. I think another big one is moving too fast into off leash. I really try to make it a point to explain to people the difference between e-collar training your dog and off leash training your dog. You can have an e-collar and a leash on, and for some reason people get surprised by that. Like, it's almost like you tell them to charge the e-collar, they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, like,
it makes me laugh every time. It makes me laugh.
And another big one is like, yeah, I've met people that charge the collar, but then I'm like, well, did you turn it on?
Yes.
Oh.
No, I mean, it happens.
There's a lot of steps, and I always tell people these collars are meant to be childproof.
Right,
so
right.
That's why there's so many steps to turn them on.